everyone. I'm just having a bit of a pre-chat. So hello to everyone watching. I think we can kick off. So great to see you all today. I hope you've all had a great start to Out Summit. I'm Suki Sandhu. I'm one of the board members for Outright Action International, and really excited to be here for this panel today with some incredible speakers. The objectives of this session are to outline key challenges and opportunities in LGBTIQ inclusion and human rights globally, elevate key trends in corporate purpose, and explore strategies and initiatives that business and civil society can pursue collectively to support, protect, and advance LGBTIQ rights across the globe, particularly in countries with discriminatory laws and practices. So we're hoping today with the session, we're going to talk about corporate purpose and its direct link to LGBTIQ inclusion, and practical ways in which business can consult with local communities to identify and take action against the most pressing risks to LGBTIQ people. So I'm going to begin by having the speakers all introduce themselves. They're going to give their full names, their preferred pronouns, an audio description of themselves, their location, a sentence about their company, and a fun personal fact to break the ice. So I'll start. I'm Suki Sandhu, the founder and CEO for Audelis and Involve. My preferred pronouns are he, him, his, and I would describe myself as a brown-skinned Indian guy with short black hair, just barely have hair. I'm based in London, and my companies are both about driving diversity and inclusion in business. And my fun fact is I once starred in a music video with Fergie from Black Eyed Peas. True story. And I'm only in it very shortly. I'm paparazzi in the background, but it's the London Bridge song if you want to check. So I'm now going to hand over to Lindsay Ray, who can introduce herself.
Thank you. That is a hard act to follow. My name is Lindsay Ray McIntyre. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer of Microsoft. I am so thrilled to be here with you all. I am a fierce ally to many communities, including the LGBTIQ community. I am straight. I come from Western Canada by birth, and have, I guess, blue-green eyes, blonde shoulder-length hair. And my fun fact is that I have lived and worked on all continents on the planet, with the exception of South America. So I've lived and worked in 8 countries, other than the one that I hold a passport for.
Fantastic.
So, back to you.
Thank you for joining us, Lindsay Ray. Let's go over to Melisande.
Thank you, Suki, and a pleasure to be on this panel. My name is Melisande, Melly, as most call me. My pronouns are she, her. I work at the World Economic Forum, an international organization based, headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. I'm the project lead here, leading our work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And honestly, my fun fact ain't great, but I feel being on a panel with 2 tech companies here, Microsoft and Salesforce, the only thing I can point out is that you may see a little typewriter here in my back, that yellow machine. That's actually the old school I am, because I learned typing on that device. So you may guess my age, but
I bet there's some attendees who don't even know what a typewriter is. That's how old some of us are, I think. Thank you, Melly. Molly, let's come to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity and privilege of being here. Molly Q. Ford. I'm the Vice President of Global Equality Programs at Salesforce. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and I always say, hey, girl. She, her, and hey, girl will do. And then I like to describe myself as I'm a cisgendered, able-bodied Black woman who's working every day to be an ally to other communities, because I, of course, want you all to be my ally. So what is my role? I lead, we call it equality, but diversity and inclusion at Salesforce. And that includes employee engagement, how we purposely touch our employees with everyday engagement around equality, D&I data and consultancy to the business, and events, partners, and customer engagement. And my fun fact is I go by Molly Q. Ford because Molly is a made-up nickname that my mother's sisters named me. And when my family said, oh, no, you have to go to school and go by your real name, I was like, wait, what? No, I'm Miss Molly. And I was very adamant. And so the Q really does stand for Queen. I am a third generation Queen Esther Old Testament Bible from the South. So I literally, if I have diva antics, it's, it's not my fault. I was born like that. Thank you.
Honestly, indeed. Thank you, Molly. And Kenita, over to you to introduce yourself.
I'm not sure I should be allowed to go after Molly again. Hello, everyone. I'm Kenita Placid. I'm the founder and executive director of the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality. It's a sub-regional network based in the Caribbean. Secretariat is in St. Lucia, but we work with 26 organizations across 9 of the small islands.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us. So I think we're going to start actually by a poll, which the Outright team are going to set up, just so we get a sense of what sectors individuals are that have tuned in. So while you go ahead and do that poll, I will introduce the session. So the global pandemic and social justice protests around the world have put a focus on diverse shortcomings across society with regard to human rights, including the right to live free from violence and discrimination, to access basic needs like water, food, and shelter, the right to quality and safe healthcare, and to participate in dignified, sustainable economic opportunity. One inescapable point is that these shortcomings have an increased toll on those groups who are already marginalized, vulnerable, and excluded, including the LGBTIQ people. So from the World Economic Forum to the Business Roundtable to the United Nations, leaders from all sectors are acknowledging the need for a great reset, a call to action for global stakeholders to collaborate in managing the direct consequences of entrenched economic and social inequality exposed by COVID-19. Business plays a central role in shaping a transformational way forward, hence this conversation today around corporate purpose and how business and civil society can link up to tackle discrimination against our community. So let's start with the first question. And I'd like to ask you all, what does corporate purpose mean to you and to your organizations? And how is it translated into action by organizations to support LGBTI inclusion? Let's start with you, Lindsay Ray.
Yeah, I feel like for Microsoft, we're really fortunate to have a huge purpose, which is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And what that does is, it is both sort of clarifying, but it's also really overwhelming. And so for us, with the 7 billion people on the planet in mind, it causes us every day to think about what more we can be doing. And so, that is both in the policy space beyond Microsoft, which we'll talk more about, of course, the employee experience and the ways in which we create a more robust, inclusive, incredible, delicious experience for employees in the LGBTQI plus community inside Microsoft. And then the ways in which we partner with so many incredible organizations to do this work together, knowing that we all must do it together in order to be able to drive nonlinear progress.
Absolutely. I love the way you describe it as delicious. I'm sure our community loved that experience. Molly, let's come to you.
Absolutely. So Salesforce has a philosophy that businesses can be a platform for change. And that means doing well while doing good. So how we can be beholden to our stakeholders and shareholders, but also make an impact. For us, it really starts at the founding of the company. The company was founded with a core value of giving back, right? And the 1-1-1 model. So 1% of our employees' time goes out volunteering in their community. 1% of our equity goes to nonprofits. And 1% of our product goes to nonprofits as well. So that means we're weaving that in. So your first day at Salesforce, you fill out your forms, you get your computer, but you put it all down and you go out and volunteer in your community. And now, of course, we have virtual volunteering to manage through COVID, but making sure we are weaving that through. But when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community, it really is about empowering our employees to bring their authentic selves to work, right? And I love to say that doesn't mean you show up like you do on your couch, right? But where we're not having to mask who we are. And it's a safe and inclusive culture. So for us, it really is about advocating for those employees.
And Molly, when you talk about that 1-1-1 model, do you find like the employees actually take up that 1% of their time, for instance, to support different companies? Not just going to be LGBTIQ agenda, they might also want to support BLM or women's networks, whatever. Do they actually take up the time?
Absolutely, and I'll give you an example. So Outforce, our LGBTQ plus ERG, they are backing the Trevor Project. So that means employees can either spend their pro bono hours actually building the Salesforce CRM network for that customer, or they can show up and volunteer and run a hotline, or they can do a donation or show up, whatever that means to you. But what happens is if you max out your 56 hours of volunteer time, then you get a grant, a nonprofit grant of $2,500 to the nonprofit of your choice. And this is a global grant, right? So employees do that. We have a leaderboard. We have leaderboards with teams. We're a competitive culture, right? My team's done X amount of volunteer hours versus your team, or so many people have accessed the grant. We actually run into the problem where so many people access the grant. We're like, we can't pay out till next quarter. Like it really is something people take advantage of.
I think that's a good place to be, quite frankly. So thank you for that, Molly. Melly, because obviously coming from World Economic Forum, you work across corporates and business. So what does it mean to you at the World Economic Forum?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Molly, I'd actually like to take a little trip back memory lane to when we were founded. So when the forum was founded exactly 50 years ago, it was actually founded on the premise of what is called a stakeholder capitalism. Now, that's a concept that got a lot of more traction and momentum now, particularly since the Business Roundtable adopted it last year. But it was something that was very core to us from the very beginning. So what it means is that companies are trustees of society, and the company is accountable to all parts of society, not only its shareholders. So, and that then translates into particularly actually upholding human rights, including human rights of LGBTI people, which are not special human rights. I mean, they're the same human rights that everyone enjoys. So I think this is really how we've defined corporate purpose from the onset kind of when we started. And then the way we do it and bring it to life is by bringing all these stakeholders together. I think that has always been one of the core missions of the forum, to say, how can we have public-private cooperation with all the stakeholders that have a say in the work. So that goes from business, government, but particularly also civil society, cultural leaders, media, academics, everyone who can really help form and influence that broader ecosystem. And there's certainly a lot of examples we can talk about on the panel today of what we've done there.
And Melly, has that been a fairly open door when you're trying to get these businesses to take LGBTIQ inclusion seriously, or is it a bit of an uphill struggle in your experience?
It depends on how you look at it. If you look at it on the journey from 50 years, we've definitely come a long way. There were more closed doors and more open doors now. I think the LGBTI equality work for the forum has become really core to what we're driving and you know, a stable part of our program, of our projects, of our initiatives, and the way we work in the D&I space. But it hasn't started that way.
No, good to know. Before I come to you, Kenita, I just want to say to the audience, please do send your comments and questions in the Q&A, and then we'll try and pose them nearer the end of the conversation. So Kenita, you're one of the activists. So talk to us about what corporate purpose means on the other side of the coin.
I actually do think that when we think about activism, and especially for an organization like mine, we look at as a sub-regional organization, and I also take that into my roles with international organizations. We look at how do you serve the communities that need representation? How do you meet those needs? And although we are not officially doctors, I think one theme that comes to mind is you do no harm. So whatever that you step up to, however that you step up in terms of serving that community, you do no additional harm to the community that you're going to, which means that you actually have to think about how you're serving, what you're serving, and how it's coming across. Not necessarily from your perspective. You have to think about how they're receiving that. And I think it is continuous, especially the fact that we are working with organizations and the persons who are not necessarily having the access that persons have out there, thinking about what your privilege is against where they are, and sometimes having to always ring that in. So in interest of serving community, it is one where you don't just come with a program, but you basically consult with them as to what you think about that program and how they think it's actually best implemented, then coming back to your own core values as an organization and seeing where those gray areas are. So it's really important for continuous thinking around, why did the organization start? How are you doing it? Are you doing it well enough? Are you reaching not just your organization goals, but the persons you need to? And although we don't always look at ourselves as corporate, we really have a multi-layer approach, because more often than not, you as an activist are actually coming from the grassroots that you're still working with, and then having to think about what corporate and funders and academics need of you in order for you to bridge the gaps between all those.
And Kenita, is there an example where that relationship with corporates has worked well in your experience, where the corporate relationship with NGOs and civil society?
Well, I could say that it probably has worked well, and I can only use the experience through that of Outright. I used to be the Outright Caribbean advisor, and I would see how Outright has collaborated with Microsoft and other organizations to come on board to actually reach certain products or reach certain programs for different regions. I have to say that the experience in the Caribbean around corporate stepping up, even if it might be a subdivision of a corporate division in the US or in Europe, there is a totally different ballgame when they come to the Caribbean. So one of the examples I'll give is banks. Say, for example, Scotiabank or Republic Bank, that's actually based in Canada. That's where the corporate headquarters are. And we could see where they support Pride and they're openly, supportive, their logos and everything. They do all the pins and so on. But in the Caribbean, they do basically, they don't do basically, they do nothing.
So it's backing it up, backing it up with actions, not just words, ultimately, is what I'm hearing there.
Yeah, there's absolutely a different protocol for how they are operating in the US and Europe compared to how they are operating in the Caribbean. And even in that of the human resource manual, in terms of protections of LGBT persons, that is not an excuse. The law of the country does not prevent you from protecting your employees. Discrimination, discrimination is zero discrimination. It cannot be subjective to which country that you are in. So that's just one of the things. I think
the one example I wanted to mention is what I'm wearing right now, which is this cape, where it's actually from Burberry, and it was Christopher Bailey when he was the CEO. And in his very final collection, I don't know if you remember it, but he basically created a collection where the rainbow was throughout his collection. And so if you think about where Burberry sell their clothes, the Middle East, Russia, China, he made a very public statement to support the queer community globally, and obviously bought a few pieces because I love Burberry anyway. But and it was that public display of support with it thinking in mind the commercial implications that could have for their sales or revenues, which for me is like, it's almost like not sitting on the fence. It's actually having an opinion and taking a side and voicing an opinion. And that's really important for businesses to do that. And then he also backed it up by making a huge donation to LGBT causes globally to make sure that they had support and benefited from the profits of the sales. What I wanted to talk about was, in terms of this year, it's been a very tough year in 2020. And obviously we've seen the awakening the world has had from Black Lives Matter and the protests and other social injustices. And I'm really, really interested to know, have these kind of forces impacted the organization's notion of corporate purpose? And has it changed the priorities or evolving needs of the LGBTIQ community? So I'd love to come to you, Lindsay Ray.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's a dense question, Suki, because, you know, COVID all by itself has disproportionately impacted already marginalized communities. We know that, but at Microsoft, we've been really declarative about the need to unpack sort of three things. One is that the Black and African American experience in the United States is acute and unique, and the experience of, you know, the Black community all over the world is yet something different. And there are acts of hate and violence that impact a number of identities, communities, and geographies. And so we've been very deliberate in not conflating any of those so that we can give each of them the respect that they deserve, knowing that, you know, we have to deepen our empathy, our awareness, and our understanding of a number of identities and communities. And here at Microsoft, particularly in after George Floyd's murder, the Gleam community and the Blacks at Microsoft community really, you know, connected to understand, one, sort of the role that the Black trans community has had in you know, much of sort of the historical narrative and the progress that has been made on injustice, but also just the practical implication to pride and the fact that we wanted to be thoughtful and sensitive. So for us, there's no way that it's you know, we have to choose, because this is not about choosing one urgent platform over another, but it is about being really thoughtful and respectful of the intensity and the deliberateness with which we need to acknowledge and respect the communities individually.
Absolutely. Molly, what's your perspective on the rise of BLM and the impact perhaps on other demographics or diversity groups, particularly LGBTIQ?
I look to Outforce, that is our LGBTIQ employee resource group. They really stood and showed us how to be allies, right? As Lindsay said, we were on the verge of pride, and then the world wrestling with the murder of George Floyd. And our Outforce, led by a wonderful gentleman named Billy, you know what? Let's change our tune. Let's change our tone. The first thing they did was send out a newsletter and really focused on intersectionality. Yeah. How can we support the Black community? How can we support the trans community, the Black LGBTQI community? And so really they took the lead and said, this is not a moment for pride, plus we were dealing with COVID. And so as a company, we started to work on what we call the Racial Equality and Justice Initiative. And that for us is working across what we call the 4 Ps, which we adopted from Melody Hobson, which is about people, philanthropy, purchasing power, and policy. And policy is really how do we advocate for hate crimes, right? And expand the work Salesforce has done in policy to really combat workplace discrimination policy. The other thing is we did a lot of listening to our employees. Another thing Outforce did was the president of Outforce happens to be a white, able-bodied man. And he said, I need a council of diverse voices that are advising me. And he really worked to create a council that says, do I have Black representation, Latinx representation, South Asian representation, trans representation, and created a council where any decisions they made or conversations they had, they're very purposefully tapping into those diverse voices and making sure everyone has a seat at the table. And it really worked as a model for us to say, you know what, none of these communities are homogeneous, right? The Black community, the LGBTQI community, none of them are homogeneous. So how do we make sure we're actually tapping into that network and getting the best talent and the best voices really coming forward? And I don't mean to say best voices, but those voices that can amplify what's happening in their community. And you'll really see where we've been on this equality journey for about 4 years. We really started to amp it up in terms of adopting self-ID practices, really doing more to get leaders to stand up as allies and say, voluntary self-ID is important. Identify as LGBTQ. We've also changed our company benefits, right? We really took a look at how we're supporting communities, and we did that across veterans, as well as Black employees, as well as LGBTQ employees. That means if you call our employee assistance program, if you're a trans person or a Black person, you say, I'm dealing with, we call it dialing in Black, and you don't want the other person on the end of our benefits going, wait, so you need a Black counselor? Oh, wait, you need a counselor that can deal with issues in the LGBTQI initiative. So really pressing upon our partners and our relationships that we have a very diverse employee set and we need to support them. Can you deliver the services to support our employees?
I love the comment from Kamal Fisazi saying, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu, which I completely agree with. To you about how around the table. Yeah, exactly. Can we Mary, talk to us about the impact of BLM in the World Economic Forum and obviously the impact on LGBTIQ inclusion.
Yeah, I think on the one hand, I definitely want to build on what both Lindsay Ray and Molly just said, that intersectionality in 2020 has become absolutely key and kind of the heart and center of the work, right? Like there will be no Pride celebration going forward without the lens of intersectionality here and understanding the joint struggle and the common history. But I also think that there is a very specific situation that the LGBTI community has come into 2020 because the health crisis and the social crisis have really laid bare the pre-existing inequities. And also we've witnessed increased human rights violations actually against LGBTI people. And there are many analyses how that's happening. But the way we're addressing that is 2 years ago, actually already, we launched the Partnership for Global LGBTI Equality. So it's a partnership to the multi-stakeholder approach that I mentioned earlier that's bringing together companies like actually Microsoft and Salesforce here, but also the 6 largest LGBTI organizations, including Outright, to work together. And what we were looking at, particularly this year, is that there are 3 areas of concerns we see that have really surfaced in 2020. Analyzing what are the measures that have been put in place and are actually aimed at discriminating and persecuting LGBTI communities. So that's to the point of, increased human rights violations and different legal situations that have emerged now through the health and social crisis. The second one, though, is also looking at what are the measures that, because of their design, have discriminatory impact, even though that was not necessarily the purpose, and are so hitting the LGBTI community harder. And thirdly, what are actually the existing inequities that already put down that the LGBTI community does not have an equal playing field, and how that's hitting them. So, looking at, for example, that LGBTI communities have a greater rate on average of being in precarious jobs, and what are the ripple effects of that? Yeah, they don't have the equal access to healthcare, to unemployment coverage, to paid leave and sick leave policies, etc. And so with the partnership, we were looking at these measures and understanding what can we jointly do to address that? What can companies do in collaboration with society?
Thank you, Melly. Kenita, any words from you around the BLM impact on LGBTIQ inclusion?
I think we have seen the impact. And I mean, it's interesting. I do think intersectionality is the word for 2020. I think it just has always been. However, what you have seen is an increased need to actually not just use the term, but to actually implement intersectionality in ways that we have not seen before. Having to think about the programs, having to think about the lives of people. I think more so when we look at the organizations and that of corporate, corporate had to rethink how some of the collaborations with NGOs happen, because the impact of COVID this year actually dealt in hard, right? It hit the bottom line, which was the profit margin. And so they had to pedal back to the drawing board and review how things are done. And I think that came with governments. It came with even civil society themselves, where funding in question got affected because fundings were pulled back, fundings were cut, even those who had funding already, and certain projects, the manner in which it was implemented, the programs they had for implementation couldn't take place. So when we look at how we work and we think about what we needed to do, we saw in a lot of communities, resilience was not even optional. Whereas in some communities, having money was a matter of thinking about how you divert things. It brought us back to the drawing board of recreating how we did things. Now, a lot of things went to the virtual world, but even that, we had to learn new challenges. We had to conquer new challenges because we never really tried to operate 100% virtually. And when many of us went into lockdown, it changed that. So what is it on the ground, and how is it that organizations were really seeing where they were going and how they were going? And I think the impact is really deep because for many reasons beyond just COVID. And I think one of the things that we saw is people had an opportunity to stop. They had an opportunity to think. They had an opportunity to observe. And so a lot of what came at us was not new things, but things that were happening, but our schedules were always too busy that some things passed us. And so do I think this is a new thing? No, I think it's just one that is given notice and time and an opportunity to actually be dealt with.
Agreed. I just want to ask a question from the audience. It's probably more for Molly and Lindsay Ray. It's from Kamal, and he's asking, what tensions are there that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion constituents in a company have to balance, and how do you do that? Are there any specific examples? Lindsay Ray, can we come to you on that first?
Yeah, I mean, you know, living in this work is dynamic on its most quiet day. And so I think, you know, some of the points that have been made on the panel of the need to constantly be listening and showing up for all of our employee populations in the most thoughtful and appropriately complicated ways as possible, right? I mean, the point on intersectionality, you know, thank you, Kimberly Crenshaw, you know, is an important one. You know, Kenita's point on, you know, engaging with communities in ways that they would find helpful is at the core of Microsoft's allyship habit formation paradigm, right? That we don't ever want to be well-intended humans who don't have lived experience that will result in our well-intendedness not going well, right? And so what we're really working on is making sure that we collectively, you know, engage with empathy and with a desire to learn and grow with appropriate accountability so that we can be helpful to somebody in the ways in which they would want to be helpful. They would want us to be helpful as aspiring allies. And so, you know, the need for us to think hard about individual interactions, group interactions, and get a little bit bolder in how we show up with one another. And I know at Microsoft, sort of our allyship paradigm, it's not a program, it's bigger than that. It serves as a broader architecture precisely to be able to have a more significant impact on culture transformation and what we can expect of one another inside Microsoft broadly and globally. But I will say, from, you know, the policy work to the learning and development work to the benefits transformation, it's, you know, we are trying to come at this as fast, as thoughtfully, and as comprehensively as we can, with employee experience as our guide.
No, excellent. And to be fair, in this current climate with COVID, BLM, the pandemic, trying to deal with it all, I think the DEI community is under more pressure than ever to deliver. It's getting a lot of focus and a lot of attention, quite rightly. but it's not just the DEI team's responsibility to implement the interventions. The business have to ultimately own it because it's their behaviors and actions that impact the employee experience you talk about. So Molly, what are the tensions that you're kind of balancing in Salesforce when it comes to basically doing your job?
Absolutely, and there's some really healthy tensions. I think for us, it's access to data and slicing data to really understand and get to the root of problems, right? For us, the other thing is really touching on allyship, right? I think folks either believe equality, diversity is my job, when no, we're creating a culture of diversity for every single employee, right? And so it's not, I think people think diversity is romantic comedies or big gestures. It's everyday engagements with your manager. It's
really, you can make it into a rom-com. Can you imagine?
Right. Everyone thinks it's big. Oh, I went to Pride. I'm good. I did positive for the year. No, it's everyday interactions with your manager. It's leaders really looking through the lens of all of their processes and making sure they have an equity lens across it, right? How are you promoting talent? How are you giving stretch assignments? Who are you investing in? Who has access to mentors, to other leaders? So really trying to get them to understand it's not my job, it's your job, right? It's everyone's job to really drive diversity and inclusion, and making sure they understand that it's those small things that matter, those little cuts. And then I think George Floyd's murder, Black Lives Matter, the economy, the pandemic, really is making people uncomfortable allies, right? Actionable allies. Allyship was cute when you put on the t-shirt and you went to Pride and you had fun for an hour, right? But now when you're being asked to actually have a conversation with someone, when it gets a little bit more uncomfortable, and there's that balance, right? Because we want and we say at Salesforce, allies ask, listen, show up, speak up. Yeah. Showing up was easy when I went to one parade, but showing up now is, I have an employee that's dealing with the verdict on Breonna Taylor. How do I talk to them? Yeah. How do you show up in their one-on-one and say, hey, how are you doing today? Show up is really different, right? And really uncomfortable. And we've got to be careful that, of course, we've got to have grace for allies, right? We need grace for allies. They can't be too afraid to say the wrong thing and not speak up or foot and mouth. My boss says it so well, and I love it when he says, if a toddler runs up to you and says, I love you, you don't go, it's not love, it's love, get it right. You're like, oh, you understand that impact. But at the same time, we as allies have a responsibility, because I like to say Google's free, We as allies have a responsibility to educate ourselves, to learn these things. But we really are seeing this year that allyship isn't as cute as putting on a t-shirt and a pen. It really had to show up this year.
Agreed. I say, or I've heard a quote where someone said, you comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, particularly nowadays with the whole inclusion agenda, particularly with also the powers of people that are at the top, because usually the majority are the older, straight, white guy. So they hold the positions of power and influence. So we need them to be more engaged and acting as allies, but not just talking about it, like you say, showing up and speaking up. I'm really keen to move on. Melly, I'm going to come to you next, because we're going to talk about the United Nations Standards of Conduct around for the business community and tackling discrimination against LGBTIQ people. So these standards provide a strong foundation for business action. However, additional work is needed to help companies of all sizes operationalize the standards across their business operations and even sectors. So what do you think are some of the opportunities and challenges your organizations are facing when it comes to the UN Standards of Conduct for Business? So can we start with you, Melly?
Sure. So the UN standards are actually the core part of the partnership that I mentioned earlier. So the partnership for Global LGBTI Equality that we founded is actually really founded on the premise to say, how can we operationalize these standards? And what I actually personally love about the standards is that they really put out up there a vision to say, this is not only for companies to meet the minimum legal requirement, but this is about agencies. So really becoming active agents, to Molly's point almost, of putting this in front of the, on top of the agenda, and not only for your own organization, but saying this is across your workplace, your workforce, but also across the marketplace and the community in which you operate. So that's kind of what I love about it, and the opportunity I see here to say this is the standards UN put out, and that's where the world is following up on. The challenges, though, that I think the biggest ones are actually to the point that Kenita was making in the very beginning of the panel of how do you do this actually in a global context where we continue to have very uneven progress, where we continue to have steps back even. And so how do companies, uphold their values and uphold them, protect them, and advocate for them across the world? And yeah, I see varying performance here. I see varying actions, and I definitely see genuine struggle in addressing that. So I think that's where places like our partnership come in place, where we bring in the civil society organizations to really help understand what is the experience on the ground, but also what are, having the deep knowledge and understanding of the landscape and understanding what's also the wiggle room, and how can companies actually step forward and advocate and create that inclusive society that inclusive business can create, right?
Absolutely. And Lindsay Ray, how has Microsoft operationalized the standards?
Well, I think for us, it was additive to Microsoft being one of the first companies to have same-sex benefits and evolve EO policies to include the broader LGBTIQ community and expand benefits globally for the community. So for us, it has been about learning from the other companies and the organizations who are embracing and rolling out the standards, but also using them as a reinforcement for our accountability and responsibility to keep getting curious and increasing momentum on our progress, because we have 160,000 people in 190 countries, and we absolutely subscribe to there is a Microsoft employee value proposition that isn't defined by the way in which the LGBTIQ community are treated in a given country, but we do have to be thoughtful about the laws and the circumstances of where our employees live. And so safety is first and foremost, making sure that we bring the standards to life, sort of as Molly was saying, in the micro interactions, as in addition to, of course, the policies and the procedures and the ways in which we expect and hold our leaders and our individual employees accountable for. But the employee experience unfolds meeting to meeting, human to human. And so for us, the standards have really been an opportunity to continue to reinforce the micro interactions, both from an awareness standpoint and an accountability standpoint, but also propel our appropriate impatience with the need to grow globally, even in the most dire geographies.
So have the standards helped then in those dire geographies that you refer to?
Yeah, I mean, the United Nations and the World Economic Forum are very powerful, unifying platforms that give confidence and also a collaborative sense of what it means to sort of show up and stand up as a broader collective to move the conversation and the accountability forward. And so, I would say that the standards have been important and meaningful on a number of those dimensions.
Great. And Molly, what's the experience of Salesforce with the standards and implementing them?
Very similar to those at Microsoft, and where we are very descriptive with our employees. We very much are careful in our language and our words, and making sure that our employees know that we stand against hate, violence, and homophobia. And more importantly than what do we stand for, and that's marriage equality. right? So advocating for marriage equality in those countries or states in the US where that might not be possible. Again, going back to upping our benefits, making sure we're recognizing our community and how we're supporting them. Like many companies, our IVF benefits used to say, you try for before the medical benefits kick in, but we know for some communities there is no try, right? So making sure we're really paying attention and bringing those communities to the table. For us, it's pronouns. We're still on this journey and folks are asking, why is this? What is this? What am I doing? Why do I need to declare my pronouns? And really helping them understand that our employees that identify as them and they cannot wear a scarlet letter. We all need to be allies and promote our pronouns. And then also how we look at self-ID. We're on a journey of voluntary self-ID where you can go into Salesforce systems of record and not only declare your pronouns or military status, or if you're a person living with disability, you can also designate if you're LGBTQ, and really making our employees feel safe and secure that they can report that data in confidence. Their manager is not seeing that data. However, we're using that data in aggregate to understand who are our communities. So when the UN says, you know, respect and stand up for human rights, we want to make sure we're doing that. We have non-discrimination policies, right? Zero tolerance at our company, and that we're really just hyper-focused on supporting our staff, those LGBTQ employees, and really making an environment where they can bring their authentic selves to work.
Fantastic. And Kenita, are you seeing the impact and benefit of the standards being implemented in challenging regions? Talk to us about what your experience has been.
I mean, I'm happy to be one of those activists who probably have been aware of the standards and involved in the launch of the standards, bringing it into the Caribbean in some of the spaces. We have seen corporations kind of step back, especially in countries like ours. And I mean, we can talk about bringing standards to countries where the colonial past is still the present. And 7 out of the 9 countries ECAID work with actually still hold colonial past laws, and that which actually criminalizes same-sex intimacy, particularly between men, from 5 years imprisonment to life. And this is where I talk about where corporate tends to use local constitution as the crutches to not necessarily doing policies within their own organization's own corporate standards to protect employees against discrimination because the local law does not allow. However, there is part of corporate law that allows you to inherit your corporate secretariat, your headquarters laws as part of your operating within the walls of your organization, but that is not necessarily done. So one of the things that we had to look at is which organizations that actually work and boast of having good standards in international spaces, and it does not necessarily operate the same within the Caribbean. And that's almost all. The only industry that has changed some of this is actually the tourism industry, because there's a lot more pressure there. And so the hotel, the cruises, the sales agents, they have come together and had those conversations around what real implementation of diversity looks like. How do you get your staff ready to bring in, to service persons of diverse sexualities? But in terms of other service industries, where we look at maybe even your Microsoft authorized dealers or anybody of that nature, how does that, what you do in corporate, trickle down? Because then you have persons representing you or who have been stamped as recognized dealers on your behalf, but not necessarily carrying standards that are what are part of your own corporate headquarters. So I think this is where we start looking at some of those things, how it's not necessarily shrinking down to the communities that actually need it. Also, when we think about even how, and it's not just corporate, it's also that of holding organizations like mine who do regional work and organizations like Outright, who do international work, but reaching in communities, and some of the governance structures that can actually be there to protect staff, but also to protect your grantees that you are working with. And so it's in the same mission of reaching out, implementing, having that great impact, and continuing to do no harm.
Yeah, and it sounds like we have a lot more work to do from what you're saying, Kenita, so thank you. We only have 10 minutes left. I know it's gone, time flies when we're having fun, I know. So I'm going to go into some of the questions we've had from the audience. There's a really good question here. What advice do you have for companies wanting to engage with civil society around the advancement of LGBTIQ human rights? Melly, let's come to you first.
Sorry, can you just repeat that question? I'm not sure I caught it.
What advice do you have for companies wanting to engage with civil society around the advancement of LGBTIQ human rights?
So, I mean, first of all, to come together is already the right approach. And I think then really working with civil society to understand what are the experiences on the ground. So I see a lot coming up in the chat as well, and I think what corporations need to understand is what is the experience on the ground, and what's the impact that are felt in the communities. And so that's where really civil society organizations can help you understand those nuances and the impacts, even though intent might be different. And I think that's where we want to bring the two together. The other thing is also that it's about collaboration, not only between, for example, the D&I department and civil society, but really having the full company leverage the knowledge that civil society organizations might have on the legal situations as well, and how to get around that, etc.
Fantastic, thank you, Melly. Molly, any thoughts from you and the advice?
Start with your employee listening. And the other thing I would quickly say is top down. You need your C-suite to care and lean in. Yeah.
Brilliant. Lindsay Ray, because obviously you're advancing LGBTIQ human rights through Microsoft. Like, what advice would you give to others to encourage their companies to do more?
I think, Molly put on the table sort of the need for corporations to hold true at all times, sort of business case and human case. And so understanding why you want to engage as an organization. For us at Microsoft, it's really important that we engage for outcomes and impact to the community. We don't ever want to, be hollow in any action or any engagement that we take on. And so I think that is an expectation of the community, but it's also an expectation we have of ourselves. And so, taking sort of Molly's advice of listen hard, but also what role do you want to play as an organization, and what are you prepared to be accountable for, so you're not hollow in how you show up or the outcome that you deliver.
I'm kind of the perspective that if you're a global business and you've got community, like your employees in Asia or in regions where it's challenging to be LGBTIQ, there's no excuse to not be involved and to try and support the communities on the ground there. So I can't imagine why companies wouldn't. So I don't know if there are any barriers or obstacles that we need to be thinking about for these companies to overcome to take the steps to actually try and drive the agenda. Any of you got any comments or thoughts on that? I know I've gone slightly off script here, but Molly.
I think you're spot on, but it's important for us to understand, particularly in the business space, that there are ways in which we can be helpful and there are ways in which we can be unhelpful. And so the public-private partnerships and the ability to listen hard and partner with NGOs and not-for-profit organizations is critical, right? There's no scenario where we ever want to show up as a corporate entity feeling like we know it all.
Yeah.
And we also have to be aware of the practical implications of, taking taking a stand, but also supporting our employees. So it's everything from sort of Molly's point on top down to manager education to employee support, that these are all incredibly robust motions that can't ever just be a flash in the pan or a social media moment, right? They require intense thoughtfulness so that the outcome for the community at the end of the day achieves something that increases lived experience both in the company, but also in society.
Yeah. Molly, what are your thoughts on encouraging companies to do more if they're not already?
Absolutely. And the other thing, I love it when companies are small and say, well, I'm not a Salesforce, I'm not a Microsoft. My advice to you is start when you're small, because if you can bake this into the DNA, it will be super helpful. It's easier to ride a ship with a couple hundred employees than it is when 50,000 or 100,000. So start now, start small, and it will benefit your company and really bake it into the DNA as you grow.
So fantastic. I'm going to ask one final question. Corporations are profit driven. How do you approach convincing them to make choices that are ethically right but might reduce their profits, such as fixing pay gap or same-sex benefits? Melly, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it almost links a little bit for me to the conversations we had in the very beginning. Companies or the corporate purpose is not to profit from producing problems, but it is about producing solutions for people and planet and doing so profitably. Okay, and so if that's the kind of basis that we agree on, and I think that has really become more important in 2020, then that's probably all the case that you need to make. And I think the reason it works now going forward is because we see how economies and societies crash if they're not, built in a sustainable and inclusive and equitable way. And so that's the case.
I mean, I remember in Salesforce, Molly, a few years ago with the gender equality pay issue, and Mark Benioff basically just pledged millions to fix it. Done. Like to fix the equality gap. So literally putting his money where his mouth was, which I quite liked. I mean, we've come to the end of the session. I'm so sorry, everyone, but I'm going to have to close it because we're on a very tight ship here and timetable. So first of all, I want to say a huge thank you to our speakers for joining us this evening, today or the afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I want to say a huge thank you to the Partnership for Global LGBTI Equality, which is a World Economic Forum project, and also to Microsoft and Salesforce for being hosts for this particular session. I'd love for you to please fill out the evaluation form, which I think has been shared on the chat. Please do fill it. It takes less than a few minutes just so we can get some feedback and improve and grow ourselves in Outright. But thank you all for tuning in, and you can connect with us on social media, on LinkedIn, Twitter. You can find us very easily, so please do connect afterwards. But thank you all for joining us.
Suki, I just want to say thank you to everybody. And in terms of corporate, I need to get that in. As much as you do internally, connect with organizations like Outright, connect with organizations that may exist in the cities where you are, and ensure that you continue consultations and conversations, not just from business aspect, but also from diversity and inclusion aspect, because it always gives you other aspects that you have not thought about that you need to add. The impact is of the end users. They're the beneficiaries. They're the ones who keep coming back, and they're the ones you need at the table. So anytime it is not given, you are not given a seat at the table, sometimes you need to carry a folding chair into that room and sit at the back, but be present.
Excellent.
So I just want to
thank
end
you
there.
so much. No, but great to see everyone. Take care. Have a good day.